Hi, today we're going to talk about the very first concept in geometry, which is conditional statement. Conditional statement involve reasoning. So in geometry, we have two different types of reasoning that we use, or in the world, not necessarily in geometry. You'll have inductive and deductive. But geometry is all about induction, deduction, and reasoning. This induction and deduction are two different things. Inductive reasoning starts with things that you notice or things that you see, patterns that you observe, and then you make an assumption based on that. For example, if you've noticed that it hasn't rained in a long time, then you know it's probably going to rain soon. That's what Sherlock Holmes does. The other type of reasoning is deductive reasoning. This is what we did in science class, the scientific method. Your hypothesis, and then you do your testing and you record your data and you prove it true or false. Your hypothesis in the beginning was either true or false. So it's when you want to know if something is true, you have a hypothesis when you start out, and then at the end, after you collect some data, you decide if it was true or not. Aristotle and Da Vinci used this type of reasoning. Scientists use this type of reasoning. This is the type of reasoning that we are going to use the most in geometry. This deductive reasoning. So in geometry, we have conditional statements. Conditional statements are made up of a hypothesis and a conclusion. We also call them if and then statements. An example would be, if it hasn't rained in 2 weeks, then it will rain soon. That is an if and then conditional statement. The beginning of that is your hypothesis. Your first piece in your conditional statement is a hypothesis. The ending after then is your conclusion. If it hasn't rained in 2 weeks, then it will rain soon. The hypothesis is it hasn't rained in 2 weeks. The conclusion is it will rain soon. The way that we will write this typically is in this format. If P, then Q, where P is your hypothesis and Q is your conclusion. If P, then Q. This saves us the time of coming up with all of these words every time. To make up situation. If P, then Q. Now the other format of your conditional is if not P, then not Q. So you do see this swirly equal sign. There's a name for it, and I just can't remember what it's called right now. And it doesn't matter what it's called. It means not. So this statement right here means if not P, then not Q. To abbreviate, we use the swirly dash. This is called the inverse, or the opposite of the conditional. The inverse statement. If not P, then not Q is the inverse. We also have the converse. The converse is when you rearrange or trade the hypothesis and the conclusion. So it's say if Q, then P. You take your original conditional statement and you rearrange it, and you end up with the converse. So your original conclusion is now your hypothesis, and your original hypothesis is now your conclusion. You simply rearrange or flip the hypothesis and the conclusion to get the converse. We also have what's known as the contrapositive. A contrapositive is formed when you negate the converse. So you will flip the hypothesis and conclusion of your original, and then you will negate them both. You take the converse and you not it. If not Q, then not P. These two are kind of mates. And these two are kind of mates. They're in the same order. The bottom one is just the negated version or the not version, contrapositive, of the converse. So the converse is if Q, then P. The contrapositive is if not Q, then not P. But there's an interesting relationship between the conditional and the contrapositive. And it's important that you realize this, especially when you start trying to do your homework. The contrapositive and the conditional are equivalent. If one is true, so is the other. If one is false, so is the other. That's your contrapositive and your conditional. The conditional and the contrapositive, they're always equivalent in trueness or falseness. If the conditional is true, so is the contrapositive. And there is a statement that we use to describe these. And you will definitely want to know this one for your worksheet. The contrapositive of a statement follows logically from the conditional. That means it makes sense. Someone could say it's common sense. Those terms, though, are important. The contrapositive of a statement follows logically from the conditional. Right there. Follows logically from the conditional. Okay? All right. Last but not least, our last version of statement is called a biconditional statement. P, if and only if Q. So it might sound like this. Today is Wednesday. If and only if yesterday was Tuesday. It's our original hypothesis and conclusion, just like we had. P and Q. The difference is in the middle, we have the phrase if and only if. That's your biconditional, if and only if. Okay? So there are all of your versions of conditional statements. So let's look at a couple of examples off of your worksheet. I think that's the right, oh, it's the wrong window. That was a blank worksheet. You did not almost see your answers. So I will encourage you and I will remind you that if you struggle with this worksheet at all, you should log on to Homework Help and have them work through each problem with you, okay? Always use your homework help. So let's look at number 1 on your worksheet. It's asking us for the converse. Look back at your notes and figure out what the converse actually means. So if two angles are complementary, then they are both acute. If two angles are complementary, then they are both acute. So let's first get the hypothesis. Excuse that ringing. There's our hypothesis. Here's our conclusion. Just like so. Okay? Hypothesis and conclusion. Now they're asking us specifically for the converse. Well, you simply switch the conditional around to get your converse. So the converse of this would be if two angles are acute, then they are complementary. All we did was switch or rearrange or reverse the hypothesis and the conclusion. So if you look at your worksheet, number 1, your correct answer would be C. Just switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. Now, question 2 specifically uses that term, which statement follows logically. Remember, the contrapositive follows logically. So in question number 2, you're going to have to identify the contrapositive of that statement that you're given. Now, in these conditionals, it only takes one instance to prove something false. For instance, if it is February 28th, then it must be a leap year. Is this true always? Is this conditional statement true? And this is where you go about studying and testing it with all kinds of different examples. Well, if you look at the year 2019, it was not a leap year. But there was a February 28th. So I could come up with other years, but that's all I need. This statement is false because I came up with one counterexample. It's also called a conjecture. Those are the same thing. So counterexample or a conjecture is only one instance that proves the statement false. Another example might be if the dog is wet, it is raining outside. True or false? True or false? Now, if you say false, you only need one conjecture or counterexample. So in a counterexample or conjecture might be, doesn't have to be, possibly, I gave the dog a bath. Another example, you only need one, but might be the dog jumped in the pool. These are some counterexamples or conjectures. Some, he could have been in the creek. I could have squirted him with a water hose. He could have dumped his water bowl out on his head. Any of these kinds of things. The point is you only need one counterexample or conjecture to prove something wrong. Okay? And you are ready to get this ribbon. So what you need to do now is complete your worksheet. You're going to have pictures of your handwritten notes. And you're going to have pictures of the work shown if there is any on this worksheet. There will be something you can write down. You do not need to print the worksheet, but you definitely need to write some things down, write some examples, write something, because you need something to upload. You're going to input the answers into the Google form and wait for your score to be released. I will see you in the next lesson.